So, you know all the big names from the summer of 1787, right? Madison, Washington. But what if I told you a forgotten founder and his pretty shocking threat might be the real reason the United States didn't just collapse before it even got started? Okay, just picture this for a second. You're at the Constitutional Convention. The air is thick with tension. And right in the middle of it all, a delegate stands up and basically threatens to walk out and go find a foreign king to back his state instead. I mean, this was so far over the line, his colleagues were whispering the word treason. So the big question is, why would a founding father risk it all with a threat like that? What could possibly push him to the brink? Well, to get it, we really need to dig into the man himself and the crisis that was about to tear the brand new country apart. All right, let's set the scene. It's Philly, 1787, and things are not good. The government they had, the Articles of Confederation, was a complete disaster. The country was broke, a total mess, and the 13 states were basically acting like squabbling neighbors ready to split up for good. So the whole experiment of American independence, yeah, it was hanging by a thread. That's why all these delegates came together for this constitutional convention. The big idea was to form a more perfect union, but the problem was, the divisions between the big states and the little states were so deep, it looked like the whole thing might just implode right there in the room.
So, who was this guy? Who was the man willing to make this kind of threat?
Okay, meet Gunning Bedford Jr. And let's be clear, this wasn't some nobody. The guy was a Princeton-educated lawyer. He actually went to school with James Madison. He was a veteran of the Revolutionary War and Delaware's attorney general. But the most important thing you need to know about him, he was from Delaware, the smallest state, and he felt like he was carrying the weight of all the small states on his, well, very large shoulders.
Yeah, a contemporary described him perfectly. A bold and nervous speaker, warm and impetuous. Basically, he wasn't exactly known for his subtlety. He was a passionate guy, a little hot-headed maybe, and he was not afraid to speak his mind. So when he showed up in Philly, you better believe he was ready for a fight.
And what was he ready to fight about? Well, it all came down to something called the Virginia Plan. This was the proposal being pushed by the big states like Virginia, and for Bedford, it was a total nightmare. The plan basically said a state's power in the new government would be based only on its population. For a small state like Delaware, that was a death sentence. It meant they'd be completely dominated.
So you can see the conflict brewing, right? On one side, you have the Virginia Plan, where power is all about population. The big states like Virginia and Pennsylvania would run the whole show. On the other side, you have the small states' biggest fear, becoming powerless provinces, totally irrelevant, always outvoted. It was a union ruled by the majority versus a union that would just devour the minority. For them, it was simple. Give in and disappear, or fight like hell.
And that brings us to June 30th, 1787. Tensions are at an all-time high. The whole convention is on a knife's edge. And that's when Gunning Bedford Jr. gets up to speak. And what he says next, it just sucks all the air out of the room.
He looks right at the delegates from the big states and says, "I do not, gentlemen, trust you." I mean, no beating around the bush there. He flat out accused them of trying to devour the small states, saying they were blinded by their own self-interest. He was basically calling out the architects of this new country and telling them to their faces, "You're not being honest." But then he takes it a step further, a huge step. He declares that if they're pushed, the small states might have to defend themselves by an appeal to arms and to heaven. Let's be really clear about what that means. That is a direct threat of civil war. He's telling them, if you keep this up, we will fight you. You can imagine the shock in the room. The whole place just went silent. The Union was literally on the verge of collapsing right then and there. Another delegate, Rufus King, stood up and said he was grieved to hear it. I mean, threatening to cozy up to a foreign power? That was just unthinkable. But the words were out there. The bomb had been dropped.
And here's the crazy thing. That outburst, as treasonous as it sounded to some people, was exactly the wake-up call the convention needed.
It absolutely forced the large state delegates to look around and realize, whoa, these guys are not bluffing. They understood that if they didn't find a real compromise, the whole convention would fail. There would be no United States. Bedford's threat, as wild as it was, completely broke the stalemate. And, it actually opened the door for a real solution. And what they came up with was, well, it was brilliant. A masterful compromise.
Bedford himself ended up on the committee that created it. Here's how it worked. First, you get the House of Representatives, where representation is based on population. That made the big states happy. But then, and this is key, you get the Senate, where every single state gets 2 equal votes. That protected the small states. Problem solved. Okay, so let's zoom out. What does this fight from over 200 years ago really mean for you and me today? Well, think about it. The U.S. Senate, the very institution that gives a tiny state like Delaware the exact same power as a massive state like California, is a direct result of the fight Gunning Bedford Jr. led. His legacy isn't some fancy essay. It's literally built into the structure of the American government. The Senate is here because one guy was willing to threaten to burn it all down just to save his corner of the country.
And, Bedford's story doesn't end there. He didn't just fade into obscurity. He went on to help make Delaware the very first state to ratify the Constitution he fought so hard to shape. George Washington himself appointed him as a federal judge, he led a college, and later in life he even became an abolitionist activist. It just goes to show he was just as passionate about building the nation up as he was about defending it.
Which leaves us with a pretty interesting question, doesn't it? When we're trying to build something, a perfect union, is that fiery, difficult passion just as necessary as cool, calm reason? We always celebrate the thinkers like Madison, but maybe, just maybe, sometimes it's the person threatening to burn the whole house down who forces everyone else to agree on a blueprint that actually lasts.